On today's World Insight, positive numbers in China's third quarter performance, what China's steady economic recovery means for the nation and the world.
Most of the recovery in China has been on the supply side.
This is not a one sector-led recovery, but overall economy is growing.
And we are a world away from March and April, where everyone was battening down the hatches and trying to ride out the storm.
And on China as an engine for growth amid the pandemic, renowned American economist Stephen Roach talks about how it affects China-U.S. ties.
Well, the world needs a rule-based structure for trading to adjudicate disputes and complaints and to track data.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. We begin with some positive economic figures out of China. Data from the National Bureau of Statistics shows the country's third quarter GDP climbed 4.9% from last year. It also brings the output for the first 9 months to 0.7% from a year ago. Global policymakers are pinning their hopes on a robust recovery in China to help restart demand as economies struggle with heavy lockdowns. So what does China's economic growth and quick recovery from the coronavirus might mean for the rest of the world? Let's talk to our panelists. For more on the latest with the Chinese economy, we are joined in Beijing Yao Yang, Director of the China Center for Economic Research with Peking University. In Shanghai, Chen Jun, Executive Dean of the Fanhai International School of Finance with Fudan University. Last but not least, in Bangkok, Jeffrey Towson, Guanghua School of Management with Peking University. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. First of all, the number looks quite encouraging, 4.9. This quarter compared to the same period last year. Professor Yao, your take?
4.9 is really good, but it was a little lower than the consensus prediction. I think it's still because most of the recovery in China has been on the supply side, investment, real estate development, and also export. On the consumption side, there are encouraging signs. For example, retail values registered a positive growth. But even with that, consumption lagged behind. I think that's why the number was a little bit lower than the consensus prediction. But as I said, 4.9 is a greater number already.
Yeah, and as a result of that, we already see the first 3 quarters together, if we look at them as a whole, positive growth of GDP already, Professor Chen.
Yes, so again, echoing what Professor Yang has said, consumption recovery typically lags behind in this type of situation because you do need people to gather around to produce services and to consume. So in that sense, it's not surprising. The good news is that, for example, during the national holiday week, we do see even industries like tourism picking up. So the overall trend is very good. And the fact that most of the sectors are recovering says this is not a one sector-led recovery, but overall economy is growing.
The momentum could be even more important than just the number itself, isn't it, Mr. Towson?
It's the direction that matters most, because these numbers could be going the other direction. And we saw that not too long ago. And that, if you're running a business, you really have to think about what am I going to be like in 6 months? How much cash do I need? Is this getting worse or is it getting better? And we are a world away from March and April, where everyone was battening down the hatches and trying to ride out the storm. This is coming out the other side, so I think you're going to see a lot of enthusiasm from the business community. At least a lot less, say, panic.
We hope that will be the case, but the dampening effect of the global economy, and also if you go to different localities, the third, fourth, and even fifth tiers of Chinese cities and counties, economy, local ones are still quite struggling, isn't it, Professor Yao, frankly speaking?
Yeah, the recovery has not been even, right? So most of the recovery has been led by, as I said, the export, local government investment, and then some of it just the real estate development. So many SMEs still lag behind, right? So most of them are either located in the services sector in first-tier cities or in the third, fourth-tier cities. So that's right. But as Professor Thompson said, the direction is right. I think the most encouraging thing is that now disposable income has become positive growth. That's very impressive because even by the middle of this year, one of my colleagues in our school found the unemployment rate, which is still very high. So if we see disposable income is growing, that means unemployment rate is dropping really dramatically. Because we are talking about the year-on-year growth, right, not month-on-month growth. So that's a great achievement, I think.
Having said that, though, all of you have been touching on consumption side. What do you think can be really the driving force in order to encourage that to, be more promising? We can't celebrate the National Day every month, right? The consumers have to willing to spend. What is going to make sure that's going to happen, Professor Chen?
So as Professor Thompson said, I think the expectation is very important. Consumers, just like households, consumers, just like corporations, they need to observe what's been the trend. If they are very comfortable that the trend, the recovery trend, the growth trend continues, and as Professor Yao said, that the disposable income has recovered, in fact, it's growing, then they feel more comfortable in increased spending, especially perhaps increase in big item spending, right? Even people, or we know that people were trying to have a wedding ceremony. They were putting this off for a few months, buying a house, big items. The other thing I want to emphasize is that we have online spending and offline. So what the national holiday does, again, as you said, it's true. We can't have the national holiday every week. But the fact is that we do see people visiting malls. The offline consumption spending, hopefully, with the two factors I mentioned, household disposable income rising, and also the expectation, the trend is not going back, it's going up, consumption will pick up more.
And one of the things about the National Day holiday spending has a lot to do with instilling more confidence about the pandemic prevention and control with such mass traveling here in China over the past 2 to 3 weeks. And obviously, we haven't seen the number increase in sharp sense at all. Professor Towson, as a result of that, how much encouraged do you think people will be to travel and to do business, at least within China, to encourage this, what China calls so-called internal circulation?
Right. I mean, we can kind of make a distinction between, say, the national holiday, which was a lot about travel, and let's say Singles Day coming up, which is shopping without the travel. Travel has been inordinately hit. We probably want more shopping festivals and less travel holidays, just because the nature of this disease inordinately hits travel. It's just a fluke. If you're in the hotel or travel business, there's not a lot you can do. But so I think Singles Day is going to be a better indicator of how fast Chinese consumption is coming back than, say, how many people are getting on planes right now, which is just a funny situation. So yeah, I'm looking forward to Singles Day. I think the number's going to jump, but I'm just guessing.
Yeah, Singles Day, just a reference for our viewers worldwide. Of course, it's on the 11th of the month of November. It's 11/11/11/11. So people see that number. So, Professor Yao, will Singles Day solve China's problem?
You're asking me because that's my birthday.
Oh, congrats.
So
happy birthday in advance. I hope you will spend more.
Celebrate my birthday on that day. I actually not that optimistic as Professor Thompson has said. My prediction is that this year's Singles Day sales is not going to take over last year's. It takes time, right? And if you look at the National Day holidays, look at the number of travelers recovered by like 90% or something like that, 80%, 19%. But look at the spending, only 70, 80%. So it is a 10 percentage points gap of it, which means people travel, but people didn't spend that much, right? So I think Professor Qian was quite correct. There's one thing, lack of income. The other one is people still worry about a future, right?
Professor Qian, please come in and join us about this online shopping. Of course, Singles Day is mainly about online shopping spree. That has been quite a big pillar to encourage Chinese consumers. Will it happen this time?
Let me take an average of those two speakers. I do think it's an important indicator, right? Because as Professor Townsend has mentioned, this is designed to induce consumption, and this year takes on added significance. I echo Professor Yao's point is that I think there's still a lot of uncertainty. As long as the growth is not even, there are enough households, younger households, they look out the horizon. If they're not sure that their income will continue to rise for half a year or a year, if there's still some uncertainty on the career path they have, maybe they will not buy more than they usually do. If we're trying to compare year-on-year growth, so my own guess will be, I think there's still a likelihood there is growth, but it's a very small one. But even with that number, if we have, it's even or a very small growth, that's still very significant, because that means, as I said in the beginning, consumption is the last sector, if you will, to grow. And if it starts to fully recover and grow, that means the growth should be sustainable.
Another thing, of course, very important is China's economy is not one of its own. It's totally connected to the rest of the world. Now, there are possibilities that as a result of COVID-19 still quite rampant in the other parts of the world, China's manufacturing sector could support the rest of the world during this process in order to maintain certain level of commodities supply. But on the other hand, there's also the issue that when the economies elsewhere are not necessarily going back, China as an economy so closely linked to the rest of the world might also suffer. So how do you see that both sides of the story, Professor Townsend?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain levers you can pull and certain things that are under your control and certain things aren't. If you're exporting to certain countries right now, there's just not a lot to be done. You're waiting. And consumption, you can push that lever, and I think Alibaba in particular is going to do that on Singles Day. So I'll put a stake in the ground. I think we're going to see growth in Singles Day from last year. I think that's something you can do. But the export factor, you just wait, and the companies in those sectors basically watch their balance sheets, and they figure out how much cash they have left, and they see if they're in good shape or in panic shape. And that's where I think this sort of light at the end of the tunnel phenomenon is incredibly important. If you're running a small business with a lot of export manufacturing, the fact that these numbers are getting better is a world away than a couple months ago, where it's like, I don't know if we're going to make it. So that's a lot of that. There's not much you can do. You just wait. But the timing is one thing. The level, are we going to get back? I think we are.
Patience is one thing. Survival is another thing. Professor, go ahead.
Looking into the next few months, I think we have to factor American election into the calculation. Right? It sounds like Biden is going to win. I hope this time the polls are going to be correct. And also, the gap is so big. It's 10 percentage points, right? Not like 4 years ago, only 3 percentage points, right? So there's a huge likelihood that Biden is going to win the election. And then what's the reaction of Trump, right? Is he going to step down smoothly, or like some of those militias in U.S. said, we're going to have a civil war? If Trump refuses to step down, that would be a disaster, not just for the United States, but also for the whole world. That's going to have a huge impact on China's export.
Professor Chen, once again about this question, China's economy is so much linked to the rest of the world. This is also so-called the outer circulation China has been talking about. But how do you see different sides of it?
So I want to add to the discussion a couple of things. One is that if you look at the trading patterns between China and other parts of the world, there are some new results that, if you add import and export bilateral, China has the most with Southeast Asian economies. And if you add up Japan and Korea, South Korea, that's a very big block.
Yes.
It's almost the same as the entire Eurozone. And then the U.S. Will be fourth or fifth. So if you must look at the trading patterns, certainly the countries and regions that are doing a lot of trade with China will benefit more. So I think this sort of global patterns of trading is also important. And that's consistent with what Professor Yao said, is that the U.S. uncertainty will impact globally, but as the trading patterns we've already observed that nations and regions and economies evolve in terms of they perhaps do business with partners, all else equal, that they feel are more steady or stable. If there's dramatic change on the U.S. side, maybe in terms of U.S.-China relations, we might see some sort of revival in the U.S.-China economic relationship, because we know that the last 2 or 3 years it's been on a downward trend. So what I try to say is that these trading partners with China and with each other are not equal, and hopefully we will see some uncertainty resolved, not added after the first week of November.
Next question. It's also important, which is what policies can still be adopted in order to encourage the Chinese economy going more in the positive trend, while at the same time be a positive influencer in the world, but at least in the neighborhood, to encourage other economies and interact with the others. Professor Chen.
So I think, overall, the fiscal policy, the combination of fiscal policy and monetary policy have been good.
What do you mean by good?
Supportive of the economy, but not overly aggressive. So my own sense is that they should keep that. If you look at the monetary side, the aggregate money supply, or what we call the social financing, has been growing, but growing at a lower speed. You still need to have supportive policies out there. I don't think, despite the growth number, I don't think now is the time for the regulators or for the policymakers to pull back. I don't think we're not there yet. And again, repeating what Professor Townsend said, this is really crucial for firms, because firms want to see, one, they want to see a very steady economic outlook. The other thing, they still want to see that in the environment they operate in, taxes are not going up, expenses are not dramatically going up. So I think we should not be talking about withdrawing these supportive policies.
Professor Townsend.
Yeah, I mean, a couple months ago, the thing that was really, when this started out, one of the biggest worries was, you're a small business, you're a medium business, you probably owe the bank some money. Most businesses have some degree of debt. Suddenly that becomes untenable. Are the banks going to start foreclosing or seizing, saying, oh, you've broken your covenants? And I think the banks rightly, either by their own choice or they were told to do so, was back off. Let these companies get through this. Don't start calling these loans right now. Yeah. And that's, incredibly important, because that's just it's game over for a business if you can't make your loan, and then what, they're going to shut you down. So that kind of just tactical support, that's not even really a regulatory or a fiscal measure. It's just sort of message from above. Everybody sort of take it easy for a while. And I think that was very helpful, gave them some room to run. It's the debt that puts you out of business first.
There's always
the other stuff hits you later.
Yeah. There's always a debate about the degrees of policies, right? To how much you do and at what time, whether it is the right way, Professor Yao.
We are going to face some challenges. As I said, the recovery has not been even. Next, we want to see SMEs to recover. I don't think that we have resolved the finance of this kind of companies, right? So in the course of recovery, we didn't rely on those companies. But in the next stage, we have to boost their production. Then we're going to face the problem of shortage of finance provided to those firms. So I think after this deleveraging process in the last 2.5 years, we have to find a new equilibrium in our regulatory framework. We haven't got to that. I believe that's going to be another hurdle we have to overcome. So as Professor Chen said, if you look at the growth rate of total social finance, it has been growing by a growth rate smaller than our conventional growth rate. What does that mean? That means the whole economy was kind of growing under the potential, right? So if we want to boost the economy back to the potential, then we have to increase the speed of money expansion, then also to channel the money into the real economy.
Right. And finally, before we go, I want to once again say happy birthday in advance to Professor Yao. But I wonder, as economist yourself, whether you have a shopping list to have for the day of this Singles Day, or for an average consumption as a consumer in China. Maybe everyone could help me a wish list. Professor Chen, let me start with you. You're in Shanghai, a lot to shop about.
I don't do a lot of shopping. I have what in Chinese we call leaders in the household. Mm-hmm. They do their shopping, and they do their shopping for me.
Right. Your wife, of course. Yes.
I might have a daughter too.
Okay, good for you.
I might buy some books, but I'm interested in observe the number. I will watch how the numbers go because and also I will keep an eye on what Professor Yao said, SME financing, and I do agree that's something very important for the next phase of sustainable growth.
Yeah, you mean the numbers of your own household and also the national household. I'm sure that's what you meant, huh? And Professor Towson?
Oh, I'm righteously frugal. I study consumption and consumers the way an anthropologist studies tribes. I'm purely an observer. Outside of books, like a million books, and that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay, I guess practice makes it perfect means the other way. Let me go to Professor Yao. What about you? It's your birthday.
Yeah, it's my birthday, right? So every year I received a gift from my wife, so I totally rely on her to decide.
See, we have gender equity at home. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, the three economists, for joining us. Yao Yang, Chen Jun, and Jeffrey Towson. Really appreciate it. All the best, and be safe wherever you are. Thank you so much. And you're watching World Insight. Still to come on our program. China is an engine for economic growth amidst the pandemic. We speak to renowned American economist Stephen Roach on how this will affect China-U.S.
What I would call the wisdom of the compromise rather than the art of the deal. And compromises require both parties to find a common ground, a middle.
Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Now let's take a closer look at China-U.S. trade relations. Amid the COVID-19 pandemic and geopolitical tensions, the prospects of Sino-U.S. trade are in limbo. The IMF released the New World Economic Outlook last week, forecasting the global economy to shrink by 4.4% in 2020, but China has posted positive GDP growth of 4.9% in this year's third quarter. With mounting pressure on U.S. economic recovery, how will China-U.S. trade be affected earlier? I talked to Stephen Roach, a senior fellow at Yale University's Jackson Institute for Global Affairs and an expert on China-U.S. economic ties. He explains how the Chinese and U.S. economies are doing and the uphill struggles both sides are facing. Let's listen in. And I'm joined by Stephen Roach, who is the senior fellow with the Yale University's Jackson Institute of Global Affairs. Professor, welcome to our program. How you look at China's approach these days, particularly the so-called dual circulation, meaning there's an internal circulation of the economy combined with an external circulation?
China's initial takeoff, beginning in the early 1980s, was very much reliant on external demand driving a powerful export-led GDP growth. But around the middle of the 2000s, 2007 to be exact, right before the global financial crisis, a big debate began inside of China about the wisdom of excess reliance on foreign demand. And so in the ensuing 13 years, there's been a lot of emphasis on developing an internal private consumption to balance out what had been an unbalanced economy. And some progress is very encouraging, but there's still a lot of work to go. And in terms of the near-term outlook for the Chinese economy right now, that internal demand piece, in my opinion, still remains a big question mark as Chinese consumers, like people all over the world who have been afflicted with this horrible coronavirus, are still fearful of reinfection, so that limits consumption. Meanwhile, the external piece of the Chinese economy that was so strong is also being impacted by a very sharp moderation of global trade around the world, as this recession has really left no country untouched. So it is still a very challenging economic climate for China, and even though China was first to recover, the outlook over the next couple of years, I think, remains quite cloudy.
What about the role of trade and economic ties between the two countries? It used to be one of those pillars. Now, of course, it's been changing.
I've always felt that economic and trade ties were the ballast, the anchor in this relationship. But that is no longer the case. Because of the coronavirus, the Chinese purchase trajectory of American goods is stipulated in the January 15th agreement. Those purchases have fallen well short of the targeted path. But given the shock to the U.S., Chinese, and global economy, that shortfall is clearly understandable. What concerns me, though, is that politicians in the U.S. will turn this shortfall into yet another aspect of non-compliance from China and with respect to the agreements reached with the U.S. And just intensify the conflict further. You know, we have a presidential election coming up on November the 3rd, and it may well be that we have a new administration coming into power in the United States in early 2021. And if that's the case, I'm hopeful that we simply abandon this structure that was reached under the Trump administration and come up with a new approach.
However, if not going with this deal, it could mean in the next few months a jeopardizing further of the bilateral relationship between China and the United States, given the figure that you have in the White House today, and also given the fact that, after all, it has been a document or an agreement, after long discussion, finally come to certain conclusion.
The United States has a major shortfall of domestic savings, and so we have to run a current account deficit and trade deficits with many countries to attract the foreign capital to make up for our shortfall of savings.
Yeah.
Last year, we ran trade deficits with 102 countries. China was the biggest. But you can't fix a multilateral problem with 102 countries by focusing on one, China. So the deal would not have worked. All it does is divert trade from China to other foreign trading partners of America, most of whom are higher cost producers, and that taxes American consumers. So conceptually, the deal made absolutely no sense. And I understand what you say, that, you know, this is something that both sides agreed upon. That doesn't mean it's a good deal, and that doesn't mean that it should become the framework for engagement in the future, especially if there's a change in administrations in the United States.
Mr. Roach, what do you make of the current realities of this international trade platform and its implications that all of the trading nations, including China and the United States, are going to feel?
Well, the world needs a rule-based structure for trading to adjudicate disputes and complaints and to track data. And the Trump administration has made it very clear that it is dead set against the WTO in its current incarnation, and has resisted making appointments to the officials who adjudicate disputes. And again, this is a political position taken by an administration that is against multilateralism and feels that international organizations are not in the best interests of a president who is very nationalistic and focused on solely making America great again, rather than in really providing support to global institutions that underpin an interconnected world.
Mr. Roach, you've been watching, I'm sure, the two political parties in your country. On the one hand, you have this administration certainly is not using constructive ways to come up with a stable framework for this relationship, no matter what the nature of it is. On the other hand, from the Biden campaign, we have seen the vice president candidate already being chosen, but we haven't seen much of clear policy in this regard. Well, understanding that international relations is not the top priority for an election, but still, this is very interesting. It's not going to be a blaming China fest, is it?
The problem that politicians face, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, is that over the past 3.5 years, this conflict, this trade war, has taken a dramatic toll on public opinion sentiment toward China. In the latest poll conducted by the Pew Research organization in Washington, I think it showed that a record 77% of the American public now has an unfavorable view toward China. And the profile of the sentiment cuts across party lines. It's Republicans, Democrats, college-educated, uneducated, male, female, rich and poor. So no politician is going to want to inflame public opinion prior to the upcoming November the 3rd election, when that public opinion is so strongly persuaded by the negative view of China. What I'm hopeful is that if there is a change in administrations, that there will be a different team of experts brought in to assess what is admittedly a complex problem. No one's going to sweep all the problems away with one fell stroke, but we will go back to a framework that I think is potentially more constructive in resolving areas of mutual collaboration. My favorite one, which is an approach that was followed by both the second Bush administration and the Obama administration, was to negotiate on a bilateral investment treaty to open up markets in both countries to each other. And we came very close under President Obama. Of course, under President Trump, those negotiations have been abandoned. But that's an example of finding mutually collaborative areas that benefit both and require compromise to reach a framework of agreement.
However, if you look at the reality, Mr. Roach, is it still possible with the ever-deteriorating situation of the bilateral relations, unfortunately? Will there still be ambience good enough for have negotiations and even to talk about a treaty? It seems that we are being pushed to a corner.
Again, I would urge you not to extrapolate. This is a pure political reaction to President Trump's very low and declining standings in the polls. And if what I said to you earlier is correct, in terms of how this fits with the Republican strategy document that has actually been leaked out in the media, this is exactly what the strategists would suggest, and that is the worse the president's standing becomes due to the malfeasance of his policies in dealing with the coronavirus, the more he is going to attack China. So don't extrapolate, and hopefully, if there is a political shift, there would be an opportunity to reset the relationship on a more constructive ground.
As the slogan goes, keep calm and move on, right?
Yeah, that's what they say.
It's a good one, huh? For now, at least. The U.S. problem, once it cannot solve its own problem, it cannot export those problems to the others either, and others could not solve their problems for the United States. So many here in China feel very helpless about the U.S. is trying to export its own challenges to the shoulders of China, which is a foreign country, and which is a different people. So are we going to see practices like this by the U.S. side continuously, even with a new administration? As you said, the atmosphere might be different.
We're going through a racial reawakening of a long simmering problem that has been evident in the United States really for most of its history. You know, the very public murder of George Floyd has ignited a sentiment and a view not seen in the United States, certainly in my lifetime, and I'm old enough to have lived through the 60s and many of the protests that have followed since then. You know, I don't think that there's any inclination to blame these problems on other countries. My point is, though, as these problems intensify in terms of this national consciousness raising that it's caused, that makes it very difficult for an incumbent president to stand for election. So he creates a distraction by these very aggressive actions aimed at China. He recently, very minor, but just indicative of how desperate he is, he once again put tariffs on some products coming in from Canada, citing national security concerns. There's no national security threat from Canada. Everybody knows that, but these are the very visible manifestations of a desperate incumbent president. It's unfortunate that when politicians are faced with domestic problems, they then want to blame others for creating the conditions under which those problems occur. And China is very much a target of this political blame game in the United States. And I would urge the Chinese to simply not ignore, but nevertheless understand the extreme political conditions that have given rise to this unfortunate turn of events.
Thank you so much. Stephen Roach, a senior fellow with the Yale University's Jackson Institute of Global Affairs. Be well, sir. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight, the name of the program, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching.